Chapter 23. Interlude. The Princess in the Tower. Philine and Roderick. Ever since she'd lost her mother as a tiny child, Philine often found herself wishing that she could become a better, stronger, prettier version of herself. Growing up, she spent many afternoons in her room closely inspecting her face in the mirror, desperately seeking to find in its cracked reflection just the tiniest glimmer of potential. Unfortunately, as the years passed, Philine had to resign herself to her bleak reality. She was meek, small-framed, timid, and terribly ordinary. What was even worse was that she was something of a crybaby, and many times she often sought refuge in some corner of the house where her father's wife might not find her, and wept as quietly as she'd been able to. Unfortunately, in their smallish house, there were few places to hide, and Jonsara, her stepmother, who was terribly fond of quote-unquote playing hide-and-seek, sometimes found her, often sneered at her, and always scolded her for her unbecoming behavior. But Philine hadn't been able to help herself. She lived in the house with a dreadful woman who had usurped her dear dead mother's place, and who every day found some way to put Philine down. Her father neglected Philine and never, ever took her side, even when she was blamed for something that she clearly had not done. Her younger brother Conrad, her only solace in life, kept getting these terrible fevers, and no one in the whole house seemed to care enough to summon a physician. She had spent many evenings drenched in tears at her younger brother's bedside, clasping his little hand in hers as he tried to hold back groans of pain, even as he assured her that he would be all right. Philine tried to bear it all, even though she was so lonely and friendless at the Royal Academy. She never once wept there, for through the years she had learned to put on a gentle, noble-like smile wherever she went, and never let that smile falter no matter what befell her. Life at the Royal Academy wasn't so bad either. She hated to admit it, but she would take a life of loneliness and friendlessness anywhere over a life spent at home at Jonsara's side. But on the day that she received a letter that Conrad had ascended to the greater heights, her heart shattered, and her usual polite mask cracked. Crumpled letter in her hand, she listlessly wandered the academy grounds looking for a solitary place where she could unburden her heart and release the tears that were threatening to spill from her eyes. But despite being so large, there really weren't any hidden nooks or stairways at the Royal Academy for her to huddle into and cry in privacy. The Royal Academy was just a series of doors and hallways where anybody might pass. She would have sought the shelter of her own chamber, but her aunt, who supposedly served as her attendant, was just another Jonsara, and her scolding was the only thing that awaited her there. So she decided to roam in search of a place for herself. She was so desperate that she felt that if she found nowhere else, she would just go out into the snow and lose herself among the blinding storm. To this very day, Philine couldn't say how she found it, but she came across a stairway at the far end of some far-flung corridor in some random part of the Royal Academy that was quiet and deserted. She looked around her nervously, but once she made sure no one was around, she climbed up the spiral stairs. The stairs kept going. They seemed to be part of a tower, but it was so dark beyond a certain point that Philine, being not at all a brave girl, decided she had gone far enough, and sat where there was still light. She shivered, for the snow was cold, the place was drafty, and apparently in disrepair. But it didn't matter. All she needed was a little corner of the world where she could just be without fear of someone finding her out. And so, for a long time she hid away there, a furtive little figure with nothing but an ochre cloak to keep the cold away, and wept. She jumped when she heard someone clear their throat at the foot of the stairs.
What? Who?
Philine cried out, alarmed. There was silence. Philine's vivid imagination imagined the worst, and that the Zend himself had found her out and was demanding she vacate his tower and betake herself and her disgraceful weeping elsewhere.
I am so sorry.
She said, almost breaking out into tears again.
Please excuse me. I didn't know I would inconvenience you.
She stuffed her special handkerchief away in her pocket, one that had belonged to her mother, which stayed nice and clean no matter how much she used it, and she did use it plenty, and proceeded to come down the stairs.
It's okay, Philine.
Said an unfamiliar voice.
Don't worry, it's just me.
Philine finally reached the last corkscrew turn of the stairway and blinked in surprise at the person who stood at the foot of the stairs.
Roderick?
She said, looking at the young boy with the hazelnut eyes and brown hair that waited there.
What's the matter?
He looked away, seemingly uncomfortable.
It's almost dark. It's almost dinner time, and it's getting really cold, and dark. So it's best you return to the dorm.
Philine looked around and saw that on the windows that lined the hallway, the light outside was fading quickly.
Oh, I see.
Philine said, still feeling very confused.
I guess it is time to head back.
They walked in silence back to the dorm. There were all kinds of questions she wanted to ask, like,
Why are you here? Why are you talking to me? We've never talked before. How did you find me?
but she was too shy to do so. In any case, Philine simply had to wonder at where Roderick was going. He was taking a circuitous route back to the dorms. Surely he wasn't lost, was he? At last, after walking a long way and taking many turns, they finally arrived at the familiar hallway that led to their dorms. Roderick peeked at her face closely for some reason, before he nodded and led her to the door marked number 12.
We're here. You should go in first. I'll come in later.
Because if they see me walking in with him, people might talk.
Philine was from an impoverished lay noble family, but even she was better off than Roderick, a med noble who was related to Veronicans who had been executed during the purge. Philine nodded and put her hand on the doorknob of the dorm, but before turning it, she glanced at Roderick and thanked him with a small smile. Roderick's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but then nodded once and said nothing. That one small incident stuck with Philine, and for the rest of her second year, she became increasingly aware of her fellow classmate. Roderick was taking the scholar course, and she the attendant course, but they had several written classes together. She'd never even noticed him before, but now that she had, she started at the realization that there existed in the world someone who was far lonelier and pitiful than she. He existed in the periphery, never once drawing attention to himself. Yes, people looked down on her, but they never turned her away or outright antagonized her. Her family was just that insignificant. Most students simply gave her strange looks whenever she drew near, before shrugging and just putting up with her. Roderick, however, suffered from being spurned on top of being continually ostracized by everyone in the dorm. The children of the Florencia faction hated him for having been the child of someone who had committed treason, and the children of the former Veronica faction were those that had survived the ordeal and did not want to incur suspicion or trouble by associating with one who had somehow managed to escape execution. He could not socialize or sit with anybody, so he was only ever downstairs during meal times. At any other time, he was mysteriously absent, until Philine realized that if he dared to stick around and try to study or work in the common room, he only attracted trouble. One day, some 5th and 6th grade boys tripped him while he was carrying a bundle of unbound papers. The sheets went flying, looking to Philine much like a flock of white birds scattering in all directions, before slowly drifting to the floor. The boys laughed at him and stepped all over his papers, while others picked up a few sheets and taunted him by holding several pages high above Roderick, who was desperately trying to gather every paper that had fallen. A few sheets had made their way to Philine, so she bent to pick them up. But as she did, she glanced toward Roderick, and for the first time since the day he had found her in the stairwell, they made eye contact. Roderick, who was also crouching, looked straight at her and shook his head ever so subtly in warning. Before Philine could process what had happened, one of the boys hauled him upright by viciously pulling on his cape. Philine heard the sound of cloth tearing, and her blood ran cold. Still, she did as he had said and took a step back, being careful to at least not step on any of Roderick's papers.
But I want to be a braver, stronger, better version of myself. How am I supposed to do that when I stand by when someone else needs help?
I apologize for my clumsiness, Lord Hartmut.
Roderick said.
I'm afraid. Sorry.
Mhm.
I'm afraid I was much too distracted. Please excuse my careless behavior.
Philine could not believe it. How could he bear it? How could he hide the anger and frustration he surely felt inside? But it seemed that Roderick had said the right words, because the tall, vermilion-haired boy scoffed dismissively before going on his way with the rest of his hateful cronies. The next day, Philine caught sight of Roderick as they and the rest of the second years made their way to their literature class. Her heart pounded for what she was about to do, but she steeled her resolve and hurried on to catch up to him. It was a bit busy in the hallway, with all the other second years pouring out at the same time. So Philine took that opportunity and bumped against Roderick's shoulder, thrusting a note into his hand as she did so. He started and looked at her with wide-eyed surprise, but said nothing and continued on his way. She had told him to meet her during their free time that day, which was after the sociology class and before dinner time. At the appointed time, Philine made her way to the tower, armed with the tools of her trade and an unshakable resolve. That was almost half a bell of sitting in that drafty old tower, but there really was no other place or time to meet. Philine just hoped that she wouldn't catch a cold while she waited. At last, she heard the quiet sound of footsteps. There was a moment of silence before she heard a now familiar voice.
It's me. Are you here?
Oh,
Philine stood quickly, forgetting that the spool of special thread and the little sewing kit she had brought were in her lap. She was able to hold on to her sewing kit before it clattered to the stone steps, but the spool of thread slipped between her fingers and went bouncing merrily down the stairs. She chased the silly thing and was met by Roderick halfway down. He held the spool of thread.
Yours?
yes. Thank you.
Philine said, feeling embarrassed.
I'm sorry for summoning you here so suddenly. I hope you do not think it too untoward.
Roderick gave a short, unamused laugh.
You don't need to worry about me. In fact, it's best if you just ignore me. That's what I came here to say.
He turned to walk away.
But those boys!
Arch nobles, Philine.
Roderick said without turning. He sounded very tired.
A few of them were Lady Charlotte's retainers. So it's good that you listened to me and didn't get involved.
Philine was silent. She knew that he was asking this for his sake as much as for hers. The best way to survive a class-based world like theirs was to keep their heads down and not make a fuss whenever others bullied them. But still...
Please let me see your cape.
Philine said.
I brought the thread with me, and it shouldn't take much more than a moment to fix the embroidery.
Roderick whirled, his brown eyes widened in confusion.
What?
It took a moment for Feline to realize that her request could be seriously misinterpreted. When she did, she gasped.
I didn't mean anything by it. Please don't. That's not what I meant.
Roderick looked at her suspiciously, and Feline felt her face warm, and her eyes began to fill with tears. How mortifying!
Stupid tears. Stop. Stop crying.
She swallowed and took a deep breath, determined to see this through.
It's just that yesterday I heard the sound of ripping cloth when those older boys dragged you. I was not able to help you then, but I can at least help you with this.
She showed him the spool of thread. It looked like any ordinary thread, but if one looked closer, one could see that it was made up of colorless, even finer threads. Roderick examined the thread against the light.
It's infused with a bit of mana. Did you make it? You know that using another person's mana to embroider a cape is.
Feline colored.
I know, but it's not what you think. I'm taking the attendant course, and we have many tools that we use on our day to day tasks. This is one such tool. We use this kind of thread when repairing garments imbued with magic, especially those with magic circles embroidered on them.
Roderick returned the spool of thread wordlessly, frowning a little.
Um, I don't know if your attendant has repaired it for you, but I saw earlier while we were on our way to class that it looked like no one had fixed it. You used pins, right? I guarantee that I can do a good job. I've been studying hard.
Feline said earnestly, but Roderick was silent for a moment.
May I see the thread again?
Feline handed it to him.
Do you have a sewing kit with you?
Of course.
It feels weird to have you stitch it for me. Can I just do it for myself instead?
Feline blinked. The idea of a boy stitching or embroidering anything was beyond comprehensible.
Do you even know how to sew?
How hard could it be? I'm taking the scholar course. I'm sure I can figure it out.
Feline, being Feline, did not react to his patronizing tone. She obediently handed him her small sewing kit and watched as Roderick undid the clasp that held his cape, then sat down and attempted to make the repairs himself. Of course he was hopeless, and of course Feline ended up doing it. Roderick watched her fingers closely as she worked, almost as if he were learning how it was done.
Why are you doing this?
He said suddenly.
Why did you follow me here that day?
Feline replied, asking the question that had been on her mind ever since that day when he'd found her crying. He was quiet and looked down at his ink-stained fingers for a long time before he answered quietly.
I saw you that day when you received a letter. I don't know what it said or who it was from, but your face looked like a vase with a crack in it.
Huh?
Feline said, putting a hand on her face as if feeling for the mentioned crack.
What do you mean?
He shrugged.
You always try to look so calm on the outside and force yourself to smile even when you're upset. And for the most part, you succeed in fooling others with that weird wobbly smile of yours. But that day you looked very distressed. You looked like you were going to fall apart, and then you simply rushed out of the dorm. The way you were behaving reminded me of someone else. And I worried what you might do, or I worried that you might do something rash.
Feline continued stitching in silence. His answer only brought up more questions. Why was he watching her? What exactly had he been afraid of that she'd ended oh my gosh. What exactly had he been afraid that she'd end up doing? Did she really look weird and wobbly whenever she smiled?
So then, why are you doing this?
He said, interrupting her thoughts.
Huh?
I answered your question. Now answer mine.
Roderick said, looking serious, even a little suspicious.
If it's pity, or if you're seeking to.
No,
Philine said, bewildered.
I would never think that.
Roderick was silent, waiting for her to explain herself.
I felt guilty.
Philine said, not daring to look up.
I felt guilty that I was not brave enough to step forward and at least help pick up some papers.
Her vision blurred, and she had to put down her work for a bit as she blinked away the tears.
All my life, I've always wanted to be braver and stronger, but when the chance came to prove myself, I failed. I'm such a failure.
Roderick said nothing, and she continued stitching in silence. Once she was done, Philine presented the mended cloak to Roderick.
What do you think?
Roderick examined it and looked impressed.
The stitching is very neat. You can't even tell from this side that it was even torn. And you can't even detect a mana disruption either.
He smiled at her.
Thank you. Thank you, Philine.
Philine felt a glow of satisfaction. In her 2 years of study at the Royal Academy, she never had felt pride at completing any single task that was related to her attendant work. She didn't have the chance to serve anyone, and had only ever practiced with her fellow classmates. But now, knowing that she had put her skills to good use for the good of someone else, made her feel very, very happy. She hummed quietly to herself as they made their way back to the dorm. Once again, she went in first, and he followed after her. It's not like they became friends after that. They kept their distance for obvious reasons. But during the 3rd year, Roderick bumped into her and handed her a note, asking her to meet him at the tower. There he proposed a business arrangement, sharing crest work. Crest work was clerical and scholarly work that was usually distributed by archnobles who did not want to do that kind of boring work and paid others to do it for them. That year, Lady Charlotte announced that it would be beneficial for their duchy to transcribe as many books from the library as possible, and said that she was willing to pay a very generous sum to students interested in taking on that kind of work for her. Roderick, of course, couldn't hope to get any work, though that didn't necessarily mean that he wouldn't get to do crest work. It only meant that he did all the work for someone else and received a mere third of the amount of what he should have been paid instead. He had been doing crest work like this since his 1st year at the academy, and he was tired of working for a pittance. So he told Philine about the job opportunity and proposed that she present both their crest works as hers alone, and in return he'd give her 10% of his pay. Philine needed convincing at first. They would never give a girl taking the attendance course any crest work. That was work for scholars. But Roderick told her that even knights, who usually slayed fey beasts and collected ingredients to sell, took on that kind of work for extra money. Then she told him it would be unfair for her to take money that he had rightfully earned, and had wanted to waive her seller's fee. He had looked at her in bewilderment, at a total loss for words, before brushing aside her good intentions and telling her that he didn't want to be beholden to her or anyone else. He also told her that she was a fool for not negotiating and asking for a bigger cut.
Never mix sentiment with business. And anyway, even if I gave you 10% of my cut, I'll still end up earning more than you. I have more experience after all.
He had said patronizingly, which set the usually mild and meek Philine's teeth on edge. And for the first time, she felt a stirring of rebelliousness inside her. She would take the 10% after all. In fact, she would do as much crest work as possible and earn more money than him just to show him. She worked feverishly that winter, hardly ever talking to him, though sometimes, whenever they passed each other and no one was around, they shared meaningful conspiratorial looks.
Watch out. I'm going to make so much money with all the work I'm doing.
On the day that she submitted the work and Lady Charlotte paid her for it, people around her murmured in amazement at the large bundles of paper she brought in. Philine, however, mostly marveled at the many, many coins that clinked in her money bag. Yet, in spite of her hard work, when they split the money, she was disappointed to see that Roderick had earned more than her.
Better luck next time,
He said with a faint smile.
I will not be defeated next year,
She replied, clenching her fist. But the year after that, he also made more money than her, which was saying something because she ended up making as much money doing crest work than her fellow apprentice attendants had made working as retainers. And that fact alone opened her eyes so much that for the no, opened her eyes such that for the first time in her life, she dared to imagine a future that was different from the one her father had planned for her. Her father and stepmother, seeing that she had little potential, had decreed that upon her graduation, she would be sent off to work with a distant relative of hers, an older, irritable old woman who was known for being miserly, throwing fits of anger, and just being on the whole unpleasant. Yet, she was the only one, or so they said, who would be bothered to take on such a meek and useless girl such as Philine. Philine had resigned herself to her fate, but now she saw that things could be different. Maybe, maybe she could do this work after her graduation. Maybe if she saved enough money, she could be independent one day. Maybe. Their relationship took a turning point in the summer before their 5th year at the Royal Academy, when she received an ordinance from Roderick, asking her if she wanted to take on work like the crest work they had done at the Royal Academy. She jumped at the chance. Their employer was a strange young woman. They knew little about her, except that she was incredibly wealthy and had the protection of an archnoble. Wagging tongues said that she wasn't a proper noble. In fact, nobody knew who her family was. There were nasty rumors that she was a bibelo from the temple and that she even lived there. Philine ignored the malicious gossip, and so did Roderick. As far as they were concerned, working at Lady Myne's was the best, and she was a fair and generous employer. She was passionately devoted to books, was very exacting and particular about the way she wanted things done, and often had them all stay until late, though she did reward them with a lavish spread for dinner when they stayed late. She paid them extremely well, and the way she validated and recognized their hard work filled them with satisfaction. She never once made anyone feel inferior or like they didn't belong. Plus, their workplace was peaceful. The atmosphere was convivial, in spite of the fact that they were all scholars from different factions and families who ordinarily wouldn't get along. But by far, the most amazing perk of the job was the books. As her employees, they were encouraged, even required, to borrow any and all books from their ladies' lending library, as she called the shelf in their break room, which was full of books that they could borrow and even take home in exchange for a small deposit that they always got back when they returned the book. And if that was not enough, they were welcome to visit her amazing book room and read whatever they wanted during their breaks. That summer, Philine and Roderick bonded over the long time spent working together. But what forged the bonds of friendship between them were the books. When they discovered the long-running Kellerland series, they devoured them and then went on to read the other tales of knights and dinner fights, which were actually really good, despite neither of them being at all interested in dinner or the martial arts. They talked excitedly about what they loved about each book, compared their theories on what certain passages might mean, or what this or that line in a poem meant. They even went so far as to talk of how a story might be improved, or a passage better phrased. They even made up stories of side characters, which Lady Myne once heard them chattering on about and she got all excited about them making what she called, quote-unquote, fanfics.
It's a pity we've only come across these books now.
Philine said, once they finished the last of the Kellerland books.
Everyone at the Royal Academy is always raving on about the Ehrenfest books.
Roderick nodded, looking a bit upset.
I can't believe we've been missing these all this time.
Wait, did I close? Was that the end of the hold on a second.
No.
Okay, it's next page, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. One autumn Earth day, Roderick asked her if she had any free time. Philine didn't have free time that day, since John Sarah always expected her to help clean the house on Earth Day, but she said that she did. They both met in the forest outside the city walls. They found a shady spot by the river under a gnarled raffle tree, and there Roderick brought out a thick sheaf of papers from his leather bag and presented it to her.
What's this?
Philine asked, cautiously taking the thick bundle. Roderick's face turned pink.
It's my book.
Your book?
Roderick nodded and began speaking very fast.
This part might be better for Kadir, but he's not here.
Channel your inner Kadir, except no uwu.
Definitely no ooh. Ooh bad. I asked Lady Myne if she'd be willing to purchase a manuscript. I had an idea in my head for the longest time, you see, and she said yes. I'd been working on this since then, and I just finished it. I wanted you to be the first one to read it before I gave it to Lady Myne. Maybe you could tell me what you think, or you could give me some ideas on how to improve it.
Philine stared down at the thick manuscript she held in her hands and bit her lip.
Philine?
Philine glanced up and gave him a sheepish look.
It's actually quite funny, Roderick. You see, I also have been working on a book.
Roderick stared at her in dumbfounded silence, and suddenly Philine felt like crying.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to compete with you. It's just that I also had an idea and presented it to Lady Myne, and she also told me to write it.
Her voice died out.
But Philine, that's great.
He said, smiling.
I'm so pleased for you.
Really?
Philine looked at Roderick in wide-eyed surprise.
Of course. I can't wait to read it. You are going to let me read it, right?
Philine's mouth opened and closed repeatedly before she found her voice again.
But, well, I don't know if it's any good. It's not as voluminous as yours, and it's just a collection of silly romantic tales I overheard at the Royal Academy. Nothing as great as your story, I'm sure. Plus, I'm not even a scholar.
Roderick chided her for her pessimism and then encouraged her to do her best. That night, she went to bed and read Roderick's story, burning through a week's worth of the candles allotted to her on a single night. But she hadn't been able to put it down. She made some notes and suggestions, but on the whole she was engrossed by the story Roderick had written and found herself a little jealous and a whole lot inspired by it. Roderick looked adorably embarrassed the next day when she told him how she had not even slept at night for reading, since his book had been nothing short of amazing. Then they celebrated together when Lady Myne accepted his manuscript and showered him with praise. Determined not to be outdone, Philine worked feverishly on her own manuscript every night after she returned from work. Never mind that she was exhausted from having to do a bunch of chores at home, on top of having to go to work every day. But at least no one in her house was suspicious about what she did late at night. Thank the gods for the money she had made from crest work, with which she had purchased extra candles on top of Ehrenfest paper and ink. At last, She finished her manuscript and gave it to Roderick to proofread, and the glow of satisfaction she got from his honest praise for her collection of short stories made her feel like she was walking on air. Even when Jonsara beat her down or deprived her of dinner as she usually did, she didn't care one bit, not when Roderick's words of praise echoed in her ears. Lady Myne also accepted her manuscript and even said that it would get illustrations and might even be sold at it's supposed to be summer, at the summer book fair. How amazing was that? Philine had been moved to tears, yet for once they were not tears of sorrow, but of joy. Philine had never before been happier than she was then. On a fateful fruit day, when they were about to break for lunch, Lady Myne burst into the room where they worked and told them all that they had the rest of the day off before she rushed back out again in a hurry. All of them looked at each other, wondering what was going on, before they packed away their work materials and cleaned up their stations for the day. Roderick speculated that it was because she was preparing for that week's salon, and then asked Philine if she wanted to spend the day outside the city walls. As there was nothing good waiting for her back at home, Philine readily agreed. The day was bright, sunny, and summer-like, and as they had both submitted their book revisions, they celebrated by actually doing nothing for a change. They flew to that same old raffle tree from before. Philine looked around to make sure no one was watching, before she sprawled in the soft green grass with a small laugh of delight. Roderick, meanwhile, sat against the tree trunk, pulled from his satchel one of the books he had borrowed from Lady Myne, and began reading it out loud. Philine listened intently to every word, smiling up at the blue sky as Roderick's words weaved beautiful mental images of far-off lands, strange talking beasts, and magical people. When Roderick got tired of reading, she sat up and returned the favor, carefully enunciating every precious word as Roderick lay beside her with his arms crossed behind his head. After a while, he closed his eyes, but she knew by the small contented smile on his lips and the way his lips quirked in amusement at the funny parts that he was still very much awake. When fifth bell struck, they realized they were very hungry. They always had lunch at Lady Myne's, and she always had her cooks prepare very substantial meals. But as neither of them even brought up the possibility of going home, they decided to forage the forest for something to eat. Unfortunately, even though it was already autumn, the raffles in their tree were still unripe and unfit to eat, so they roamed the forest for a bit more and came across a large bush of root trebs a distance away. Now, root treb season was supposed to be well and truly over, but given the unseasonably warm weather, it seemed that there were still plenty of them to be found. Even the shrimels hadn't gotten to that particular patch yet, which was a lucky break for Philine and Roderick. They gathered as many as they could and feasted on them under the sprawling shade of the raffle tree, chattering about anything and everything as they ate until they were full and their fingertips and lips were sticky and red from the juice of the root trebs. They laughed at each other for looking so silly with the bright red staining their mouths, and then went to the nearby river to wash away the fruit juice. It was then that disaster struck. Now, Philine's dress was plain and much too thick for the summer-like weather they had been having, but it was long-sleeved at least. Philine's clothing was all long-sleeved and tended to get in the way, so she had to pull them up whenever she worked or washed her hands in, say, a river. Philine was enjoying herself so thoroughly that she forgot that those wretched sleeves also hid the telltale bruises and welts from Jonsara's abuse. Philine gasped and quickly covered her forearms again, hoping that Roderick had not seen them. But when she glanced up, she saw that he looked stunned, and on his pale face was a murderous expression she'd never seen on him before. Never had she seen him so angry, not even when he'd been tormented by the boys at the Royal Academy.
Philine!
He said at last, and the way his voice sounded hoarse as he said her name made her heart twist inside her painfully.
It's nothing.
Philine said, looking away.
It was an accident.
Don't lie to me, Philine.
Roderick said, taking a step toward her.
What is he gonna do? Is he gonna yell at me? Hurt me?
It was a ridiculous thought, of course. She knew Roderick would never hurt her, but her body had learned over many years of abuse to flee and protect itself at the first sign of aggression, so she scampered away with a cry.
He saw. He saw. He saw.
She had tried so long to hide from others, from him, the pathetic state of her life, the constant abuse she received at home, the fact that her mana was so poor that she couldn't even cast healing on herself, the fact that she was so poor that breakfast was always tough, day-old bread and soup leftovers, which she had to warm up herself in the kitchen, that her dresses were threadbare cast-offs from richer family members, which she mended and altered herself so they would fit her better. She had tried so long to hide, even from herself, the fact that she needed rescuing. Tears of shame ran down her cheeks, blinding her so that she didn't really see where she was going. She missed the root of a tree and tripped over it, but before she actually fell on her face, a set of hands caught her, and Roderick pulled her against his chest so she wouldn't fall. She struggled against his grasp, desperate to break away from his firm grip.
Philine.
He said, gathering her in an embrace.
It's all right. It's only me. You're going to hurt yourself if you keep going like this. Please stop.
He held her for long moments, whispering reassuringly in her ear, and never letting go until at last his voice broke through the fog, and she came to herself once more and went still. Roderick continued to hold her as her heartbeat and breathing returned to normal, and Philine felt herself go weak. But Roderick supported her and held her tightly. Philine never felt so safe. Slowly, tentatively, she wrapped her arms around Roderick and held him as tightly as he was holding her. Then she let out a shaking breath before she started crying, as she hadn't let herself cry before. She was tired, so tired, of hiding and trying to pretend that she was strong and brave. What was the use of pretending now? She was just a crybaby after all. Within the safety of his arms, Philine broke down and told him everything. Okay, this is the halfway point. So it would be, we would pick this up on Monday, you guys. But yeah. I guess end of chapter, end of session. So that is the first part of the interlude with Philine and Roderick. By the way, for those of you who haven't read this, and that's Patrick, I think you haven't read this one yet, so good job on picking up all the little
Correct.
nuances and the little emotion. Good job on that. Anyway, so sorry while I wipe a little tear here. Hey, yeah, it's been a while since I read this, okay, you guys? So I'm like, oh. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're all shedding a few tears here.
Yeah. I think they're they could have been a good couple. Of course, I'm still Damiel Philine all the way. There's just Philine and Damiel are meant to be, okay? They're just the best in canon. But you know, it could have been cute, I guess.
I would think in this story, Philine and Damiel never really met. They may have seen each other from time to time, but Damiel never had a reason to lose his engagement with whoever it was that broke it off.
Yep.
And and thus he never had the opportunity to save her.
Mm-hmm.
And Philine, she was likely going to fall for the first one to save her.
Yeah.
And in this case, it was Roderick.
It was Roderick. And I tried to also... poor Conrad. I was like, there's no way Conrad would have survived if it hadn't...
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And it was Conrad's going into the distant heights that kick-started this whole chapter. The fact that Philine was just barely hanging on there, but I think that would have been her breaking point, like, if somebody hadn't found her, probably. I tried to kind of put it there, but not so blatantly. But she would have probably, like, I don't know. It would have been really sad for her if she hadn't found somebody to, like, at least some human person who would have reached out at that time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying she would have, like, killed herself or run out into the snow, but it would have really broken her in a way that would have been irreparable.
Definitely would have fallen into despair because Conrad pretty much was her only ray of sunshine, with Jansara being Jansara.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she's incredibly lucky that somehow Roderick was able to escape the purge, seeing as it was Rosemine's influence that allowed children who were innocent of whatever crimes to evade punishment.
Yeah. So the lucky break for him was that his father actually cast off his wife, his second wife, and the child from the second wife. So that was him and his mother. They were cast off like months before the purge. So they were able to just escape by the skin of their teeth. Otherwise, they would have ended up in such a situation. So it was quite close. Close enough that he's being ostracized by everybody. So, like, when I
he was he was also the one who influenced Wilfred into going into the Ivory Tower, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. That was him. But in this there wasn't, that didn't happen. At least, or maybe it did happen. I don't know. When did Wilfred...
Well, you're the author. Maybe you should know.
No, I'm trying to think, like... No, I'm trying to think, when in the timeline was that? Was that after Georgine visited?
No, I don't think she'd visited yet. It was shortly after Rosemine was adopted into the archducal family.
Well, if Georgine already came, then probably no. But if she hadn't, then probably yes. So there's many reasons why he was cast off by his father. I just leaned on the fact that his father was a big fat jerk and he did things that big fat jerks do. But yeah, I will talk. I know I keep mentioning the purge and stuff like that. There was a purge before, but it had totally different reasons why it happened and different victims and stuff. But I won't cover that for a few chapters yet.
It was after the visit, by the way.
Huh?
He was the tower. He did that after her visit.
Oh, after Georgine's visit.
Okay. I was mistaken.
Because I think all she wanted was to start to destabilize Sylvester and his family. So that was like plan A or something like that. I don't know. So
that was the prep work for the invasion.
Yeah, it was prep work. She was in for the long game. So yeah. All right, you guys. So that is the first half of chapter 23. We will continue with the rest of it for the next read along, which would be on Friday. No, Monday. Monday, yes. I do want to give a huge shout out to Teal, who read Philine. I always like shout out to Teal because she does the highlighting for the
Yes,
read-alongs.
I was going to mention that.
Yes, but also on top of that, she's a little bit under the weather. So Teal, thank you so much for reading Philine. You were fantastic, as were you,
Feel better
Roderick.
soon.
And I do hope you feel better soon. Rest and drink water and do what you need to do. But yeah.
Understood. Yes.
Yeah. I'm so thankful though that you were still like willing to read for us. You did very well. All right, you guys. As always, if you enjoyed this read along, like, comment, I don't know, engage with this in some way, share it with people, I guess.
Come join us.
And
support her on Ko-fi.
And also, yes, hop on over to our server. I don't know, I think it's a fun place to be at. You can do so by becoming a member of our own Ko-fi. And that helps a lot because again, this channel is not monetized, so no matter how, until I reach 1,000 subscribers, I will
subscribe, join the Ko-fi.
Yes.
Support
the magpie. So we'll see you then on Monday. I had lots of fun. Again, thank you to all of you who joined in. Let's see. Sugar Queen. Okay. Lamprecht got married earlier than in canon timeline. Yes, so Lamprecht did get married earlier than in the canon timeline. I don't know how far you read.
I was meaning to ask if he got married to Aurelia still.
I did mention, I think, Aurelia on an Elvira chapter. So it did happen. Somehow it did happen. I don't know. Like, there's some details that I was just like, let's just force it in there. Like, somehow it happened. So marriage to Aurelia did in fact happen. In this alternate universe, just because I don't know, I just wanted to name drop a person or two here that you guys might find familiar. But yeah, Aurelia.
I wonder how she's getting on in Ehrenfest since there's no Rosemine to foster that, relationship between her and Elvira.
Go back to the chapter called.
She stays isolated most of the time.
And that's one of like Elvira's chief complaints is that she does not want to socialize. In fact, she does not. In fact, it's to such an extent that she has a child. They have a child, but she's not going to show up or show her face at the baptism. So Elvira has to take responsibility over the baptism of the child and basically take on the child. So I think that's in chapter 8 and 9, where it's Elvira and Eckhart chapters. They talk about a little bit about that. So little by little, I keep expanding the universe as I wrote, because I'd never even thought to talk about like the situation with Elvira and having to take on the other child until like, I don't know, chapter 80 something, we get a mention of the child again, and there's other stuff. So there's like little by little, we're just exploring the universe. So I hope you guys continue to join us for the next couple of read-alongs. But for sure, we'll see you on Monday at noon Pacific. I'll see you then, you guys. Thank you for watching. Until Monday.
Hasta luego.
Adios.
Bye.
Bye, chat.
Oh.
Night.